gonna start already, huh?
No, I'm not starting.
How are you?
I'm almost through.
In the golden age of television, there were two kings, the one who worked for it, Johnny Carson, and the one who was born with it, Dean Martin. They were gods of the airwaves, but a secret war was brewing. Carson, the meticulous professional, saw Martin's effortless charm as a personal attack. He couldn't stand the man, and it ate him alive for decades. Today we're exposing the real reason for this toxic feud. It wasn't the act, it was something Martin did to Carson, an ultimate snub that got him blacklisted forever. What viewers saw. To understand the massive gap between these two men, you have to understand one thing about Johnny Carson. He was a craftsman. The Tonight Show wasn't just a TV show to him, it was a finely tuned machine, and he was the chief engineer. Carson came from Nebraska. He was a magician. He understood that making something look easy actually takes an incredible amount of hard work. What most people don't realize is that Carson spent his entire day preparing for the show. His monologues were written and rewritten dozens of times. He would practice his famous coin flips and golf swings backstage to get the timing just right. He respected the audience, and he respected the process. And then, there was Dean Martin. Dean Martin was the exact opposite. He was the king of cool. His entire public image was built on the idea that he never tried. He was all about the vibe. He was the guy who could just show up, glass in hand, and charm millions without breaking a sweat. And here's the deal. Carson couldn't stand it. The first major issue was Martin's famous drunk persona. During the 1960s and early 70s, Martin would often appear on The Tonight Show projecting this character. He would slur his words slightly, lose his train of thought, and treat the whole thing like a casual party.
I just dropped in because I come to wish you a happy anniversary, but it seems to me it's impossible for you to have an anniversary. You've only been married 7 months.
The audience at home ate it up. They found it charming and irresistible, but Carson found it deeply disrespectful. According to multiple Tonight Show writers and producers, Carson would be perfectly professional on camera, guiding Martin through the segment. But the second the cameras stopped rolling, he would be fuming. He felt Martin was mailing it in. He believed that making something difficult look easy required discipline. But Martin's whole act was pretending that discipline didn't matter at all. It drove Johnny crazy. The crazy part is, it wasn't just the drunk act. It got so much worse. The second, and maybe bigger problem for Carson was that Dean Martin was a terrible guest. Yeah, about that. Carson was a master interviewer. He did his homework. His staff prepared pages of research, and Carson would review all of it. He crafted his questions to guide the conversation and make the guest look good. What most people don't realize is that a single good appearance on The Tonight Show could make a comedian's career overnight. That's how much power Carson and his show had Martin treated, that power like a joke. Producers said Martin rarely, if ever, bothered with pre-interview discussions. He'd just show up moments before walking through the curtain. Once he sat on the couch, he would completely derail Carson's carefully planned segment. Carson would ask a well-researched question about Martin's new movie or his variety show. Martin would give a one-word answer. Or he'd ignore the question completely and launch into some unrelated story about a golf game. This forced Carson, the host, to do all the work he had to scramble to keep the conversation going, to find something, anything that would make for good television. There was a famous appearance in 1974. Carson tried to ask Martin about a recent guest appearance by Frank Sinatra. It was a perfect setup. Instead of answering, Martin just smiled, looked at the audience, and started talking about a golf tournament he'd just played in. The camera caught a brief flash of real annoyance on Carson's face before his professional mask slipped back on. The breaking point for this on-air behavior came in 1976. Martin appeared on the show, and this time he seemed to cross the line from his tipsy character to being genuinely impaired. Staffers who were there said he kept losing his place in the middle of a story, laughing at things that weren't jokes, and at one point seemed to forget where he was. Carson, ever the professional, got him through it. But backstage, he was done. He allegedly told his producer, "I don't care if it's an act. If you can't finish a sentence, you're not doing comedy. You're ending airtime." After that night, the invitations for Dean Martin to appear on The Tonight Show suddenly dried up. It wasn't a total ban, not yet. But it was the beginning of the end. But the on-air disrespect was only half the story. The phony king of cool. So, Here's the deal. To really get why Carson disliked Martin, you have to understand the two very different worlds these men came from. Johnny Carson was the ultimate outsider who became the ultimate insider. He was the Midwesterner with a polite, reserved, and almost cool-to-the-touch personality. He had worked his way up through hard work. He built his own kingdom in television, and he ran it based on his values: preparation, punctuality, and respect for the entire crew. Dean Martin, on the other hand, was the old Hollywood system. He was a core member of the Rat Pack. That was the group led by Frank Sinatra, with Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. They operated like entertainment royalty. Their entire brand was built on an aggressive, swaggering coolness. They had their own insider jokes, they drank heavily, and they treated their fame like a private club that most people weren't allowed into. Carson hated this attitude. He couldn't stand the Rat Pack's arrogance. He felt it was an outdated way of behaving. This difference in values showed up in one major way: how they treated the staff. What most people don't realize is that Carson was famous for treating his crew with incredible respect. He knew the stagehands' names, he knew the cameramen, he would send gifts for birthdays and anniversaries. He was the boss, for sure, and he could be very tough. But he believed everyone working on his show was a professional and deserved to be treated that way. Martin, by contrast, brought that Rat Pack hierarchy to the set. According to staff accounts, he rarely learned any crew members' names. He would treat the set like his personal lounge, with the expectation that normal workplace rules just didn't apply to a star of his size. This was a mortal sin in Carson's world. But here's the catch, and it's the real key to the whole feud. It wasn't just the arrogance, it was the phoniness. Carson's biggest problem with Dean Martin wasn't the drunk act, it was that he believed the act was fake. Think about that. Carson was no saint. He enjoyed a drink and had many friends who were famous for their heavy consumption. He loved having guests like Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole on the show. Those guys were legendary partiers. But here's the difference. They were honest about it. It was real. Carson hated the phoniness of Martin's persona. It's now a well-known fact in Hollywood that Martin's glass on stage often didn't have alcohol in it. It was just apple juice. His drunk stumbling, his slurred words. It was a practiced routine. In reality, Martin was often one of the first people to leave a party. He was a homebody who liked to be in bed early. For Carson, a man who valued authenticity, this was the ultimate lie. He felt Martin was building an entire, massive career on a complete and total fake-out. He was pretending to be this carefree party animal, but it was all just a character. This phoniness, combined with the Rat Pack arrogance, was something Carson found deeply, personally offensive. The private dislike was one thing, but one night it became public. Martin's accidental takedown. Every hidden feud has a tipping point. It's that one event that turns a private dislike into a full-blown, undeniable problem. For Johnny Carson and Dean Martin, that night came in 1975, and it didn't happen on The Tonight Show. It happened at a high-profile NBC roast for a network executive held at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Carson, as the undisputed king of the network, was the master of ceremonies. This was his event to run. And true to form, he prepared. He had pages of sharp, perfectly tailored jokes. He had practiced his timing. He was ready to be the professional, hilarious host everyone expected. Dean Martin was also on the bill. He was just slotted for a brief 5-minute segment in the middle of the program. According to multiple people who were in the room that night, Martin showed up, and he wasn't apple juice tipsy. He was visibly impaired, genuinely. He was in such rough shape that network executives were in a total panic. They were backstage, frantically debating whether to pull him from the show. They were afraid he would be a disaster. In the end, they decided that pulling a star of his size would be a bigger mess, so they nervously let him go on. And the crazy part is, Martin was a sensation. With no script, no preparation, and in a state of genuine impairment, he walked on stage and delivered what many attendees called the most hilarious performance of the night. He completely ignored his 5-minute time limit and just riffed for nearly 10 minutes. He was spontaneous, he was charming, and he absolutely brought the house down. The room was roaring with laughter, and then Johnny Carson had to follow him. Carson, with his stack of carefully written, practiced jokes, had to walk on stage right after the spontaneous genius had just blown the roof off the place. By comparison, Carson's polished material suddenly felt stiff and overprepared. He was completely and totally upstaged. Carson was furious. Backstage, he was not the calm, cool host America knew. One network executive who witnessed the aftermath said Carson was raging. He was overheard saying, "Dean is a lazy drunk with better writers." That single quote reveals everything Carson had long suspected, that Martin's effortless charm wasn't effortless at all. He believed Martin had a secret team of writers feeding him brilliant lines that he would then make look improvised. To Carson, this was the ultimate form of dishonesty. And on this night, that dishonesty had publicly humiliated him. It rewarded the very behavior Carson found unprofessional, showing up impaired, and it made his own hard work look, well, hard. The professional rivalry had now become personal. Carson was angry, but the final break was yet to come. Carson's 20th anniversary revenge. So, here's the deal. By the early 1980s, the relationship between the two men was basically non-existent. Martin was no longer a guest on The Tonight Show. The two giants of entertainment were operating in different orbits, but in 1981, Johnny Carson was willing to let it all go for one night. NBC was planning a massive primetime television special. This wasn't just any special. It was a celebration of Johnny Carson's 20th anniversary as the host of The Tonight Show. This was, without a doubt, the biggest and most important event in television that year. The production team was pulling out all the stops. The guest list was a who's who of Hollywood legends. Frank Sinatra, Jimmy Stewart, George Burns. Everyone who was anyone was being invited to pay tribute to the king of late night. And, according to the show's producers, Johnny Carson personally put Dean Martin's name on that list. Despite all the history, despite the on-air disrespect and the roast humiliation, Carson wanted Martin to be there. He was an important part of the show's history. Carson wanted to reunite several of the legendary performers from the show's early years, and he wanted Martin to be part of it. It was a huge olive branch. At first, Martin's representatives accepted the invitation. They confirmed. They blocked the recording date on his calendar. The Tonight Show producers started planning the entire segment, writing material specifically for Martin. Then, just 2 weeks before the special was set to tape, Martin's team called the producer. He was out. He was canceling. And the reason? There was no real reason given, no explanation, no, "I'm sorry, I have a scheduling conflict." He just blew it off. This was it. This was the final unforgivable insult. For Carson, this was no longer a professional disagreement about vibe versus preparation. This was a deep, personal slight. He had reached out, in good faith, to include Martin in the most important night of his professional career. And Martin hadn't just said no. He had said yes, let the team do the work, and then backed out at the last minute, throwing the entire production into chaos. Producers had to scramble. They had to scrap the entire segment they had built around Martin. But the real damage was done with Carson. According to a senior NBC executive who was there, Carson's reaction was quiet, cold, and absolute. He never spoke to Martin again. And he banned him from The Tonight Show. What most people don't realize is how rare this was. This wasn't a temporary cool-off period. This was a permanent for-life ban. For the next decade, right up until Carson's retirement in 1992, Dean Martin never, ever appeared on The Tonight Show again. He was shut out from the most important platform in entertainment. The feud that had started with a drunk act and lazy interviews, that was fueled by a deep clash of professional values, had finally ended with a personal betrayal. Carson, the man who valued loyalty, preparation, and respect above all else, could not forgive this final act. The King of Cool had delivered one snub too many. The thing is, it's a fascinating look at two different kinds of stardom. In the end, the man who built his entire career on the illusion of not caring delivered a real insult. And the man who could take a joke for a living found it was the one thing he just couldn't forgive. So, who was right? Was Carson too sensitive? Or was Martin the ultimate unprofessional? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.